This is going to be a really relaxed evening, about an hour, maybe a bit more of celebrating what sports people have done from the veterinary background in UCD. And there's a whole pile to be proud of. And it's not just, in case you're feeling like, why wasn't I invited on stage, or why haven't I on the panel? We couldn't have 40, 50 people up here on stage. So we chose the people we most wanted to embarrass. And we said we'd bring them up for a little chat. And the rest of you, there are roving mics for the next hour or so, so don't be shy. Pick up a microphone, tell us a story, or even better, embarrass somebody on the stage. I know all about chicken vets after the last hour with Mr. McGuinness over there. I've had an hour-long schooling in the background. I don't have a background in veterinary medicine. I did go to UCD only a couple of years ago. I completed a master's in sports management part-time. Nearly killed me, but it was fantastic to be here. It's a wonderful university, and I was very lucky to come back as a mature student and spend a bit of time here, although I was in the health sciences building and the sports centre. I didn't set foot in the veterinary building until the other day, meeting all the guys. So anyway, I'm just delighted to be here, and I really do appreciate your time. So, shall we bring on our special guests? We have quite a number of them, and what I'm going to do is, I'm very conscious that not everybody involved in sport knows everybody involved in sport or involved in other sports to your own. So, just so that everybody know who everybody is, I'm going to invite them on stage in order of their sport. So first of all, will you welcome please Brian Dooher and Ger Kelly from the Gaelic Football family. Take a seat, guys. Take a seat there at the edge. Yeah, perfect. Sit down there. And you might as well grab a microphone because you'll be embarrassed first. Mr. Dermot Weld from the horse racing fraternity. Representing the sport of rugby, Derek McGrath and Fiona O'Brien. Up you come, guys. Great stuff. We have Susie Mitchell from track cycling. Up you come, Susie. And then Sue Rackard and Shane McGuckin from hurling. Up you come, guys. So take a seat. Take a seat, take a microphone. And like I said, there are a few roving around as well. This is all very cosy, isn't it? You all look very nervous. There's nothing to be nervous about. It's only an old chat. Pick up some of them now. Come on. Ger, Brian, pick up a microphone. The rest of you, come on. Brian, do you have any rebuttal to the story that that Michael told earlier on? Do you want to get that off the table there? A man that went all the way for the extra 1% playing for Tyrone.
No, I was, what Cleona was on about, I had problems with the knee and I was getting desperate for a cure, so I was willing to try anything at that stage.
Well, going to a vet is pretty desperate, all right, when you're a human being. Tell us, because when you were playing in UCD, you were travelling back to Tyrone, you were studying. I can't imagine veterinary is one of the easier courses when you're at third level. How did you manage all of that? And more importantly, how did Mickey Hart let you manage all of that?
Well, probably, well, Mickey wasn't involved at that stage, but it's not easy, but suppose my life probably revolved around football and everything else took second place, so it was football first and then probably veterinary second.
Ger doesn't believe you.
Well, I think in my time, when I qualified in '92, when I was part of the Clare team, I guess I didn't go near the Clare panel between Easter and after the final exams, and a few jogs around Herbert Park was the sum total of my training. So it's quite a contrast to Brian's experience.
Things changed, though, I think, in the 90s, didn't they? Like, you know, things got started to get, I mean, today, we'll talk about today shortly. Today is almost professional. It's pretty much professional for teams like Tyrone. But things were starting to turn that way in the 90s, weren't they, Brian?
Things were, towards the late 90s, the preparations were stepping up. You know, whenever I started college in Dublin here, I didn't have to travel up the road during the week. But from third year on, fourth year on, I was going up during the week on a Tuesday night for training and back down again. Now that's normal. But I think there was a few teams probably took at that level. The teams like Dublin, I suppose, and Meath, them teams were preparing a lot better than the rest of us. And it was probably Armagh that probably woke Tyrone up. Tyrone always knew they were thereabouts with Armagh, but with Armagh won the Ireland 2002, it was just with their level of preparation and their attention to detail that maybe we said to ourselves, we're not that far away here if we knuckle down and do things properly instead of enjoying ourselves a bit too much.
If you're saying that the Dubs were training harder than everyone else in the late 90s and early 90s, they don't have a whole pile to show for it.
I think Dublin beat Tyrone in an Ireland final around that time in the middle of the 90s, sorry, but no, it was definitely, things were starting to ratchet up. And
yeah,
but
after 95.
that wasn't a problem because that's what you enjoyed doing, and there was nothing you enjoyed more doing than training with a group of people that you were with. You know, it wasn't, people say it's a chore or whatever, or a sacrifice, but it is in a way, but it's what you want to do.
Tell us, Ger, when you were in college and you were here training hard, studying hard, playing hard, probably. Yeah. There was a little bit more of that in those days, was there not?
For sure, yeah. For sure, it was very different then, things you could get away with. I remember, you know, we stayed in Marlborough Road, 3 guys in a single bedroom apartment, and our house, and the upstairs, the landlady would call. That was the phone call. That was the contact for the Clare manager, John Maughan, at the time. And he'd call, and next thing I could hear her trampling along the floorboards and shouting down from the top door, Jared, there's a phone call here for you. He's the most ignorant man I've ever met in my life, because he was wondering why I wasn't, lining out in Lahinch for those torturous training sessions on the beach. But I suppose John Maughan, back at the time, you know, obviously it was the start of his notoriety and the link that he had with us. And I remember he was I think he was the first probably manager that ever togged out on the sideline of an All-Ireland semi-final, himself. But it was very different then, and we had great times, you know.
Was he ahead of his time, so?
Oh, I think he was. His dedication, because he did a lot of the training himself. He'd come up beside. He had multiple knee operations himself, and he'd limp up behind you in a long run, you know, and his tongue out the side like Dermot tell you, the horse with that needed a soft palate job or something. But he really. He wouldn't ask you to do anything that he couldn't do himself, and he did all the training sessions, and obviously an inspiration, you know.
Was it 92 you beat Kerry?
92 we beat Kerry in. I suppose we had a small group of people who I suppose we had trained hard. I suppose with Maughan's techniques and on the beach and all that kind of stuff. I suppose we were probably one of the first of those. You know, those Duracell kind of heavy training sessions, and he'd put us through it, but he had built a great spirit, you know, and I suppose it was a surprise to most, and it's easy for us to say now, but it wasn't really a surprise, I suppose, for the people directly involved. We fancied it, and we had great times. I remember I started veterinary. My first day at work was the morning after the Munster final. In 1992, and
ideal.
We got home at, as they say now, it's stupid o'clock at whatever from the West County Hotel, and we had to be Department of Agriculture supervised for the first TB test. And I remember at the end of the week, I had unfortunately decided that the testing was listed for a hotbed of TB, and at the end, come Saturday evening, I think 6 of the 8 herds that I had tested had gone down with TB, and such was my notoriety for this, that the following week you had to notify the farmer the previous week where you were going to be testing the following week. So this old boy anyway had taken great exception to my newfound fame, and so he phoned up the office and he said, could you please tell your man Kelly to stick to the football and send out the boss to test the cattle.
Did your career suffer as a result of your football? Your fame, your newfound fame?
Yeah, but that didn't last. That didn't last, yeah.
They saw you coming after a bit of celebration, is that what it was? Okay. We have some footballing greats on the table right in front of us, and lads, you're not to be shy now. Des, there's no microphone there in front of you. This table here, if you lob it down there, Rory.
I mean, I'm very fortunate in that I loved playing Gaelic football when I was here in UCD. I was very lucky as well that we had maybe to say a few words about Eugene McGee, who was a great
Yes.
manager and who died recently this year. And he was in charge of the freshers, he was in charge of the UCD teams and whatever. And just to tell you a story about that, I shared a flat with a guy called John Purdy, who could well be here tonight. He won an All-Ireland minor medal with Down in 66, a senior in 67, National League in 67, and a Sigerson in 68, and just, a tremendous footballer, a real prodigy. But he couldn't get out of bed in the mornings. And Eugene McGee used to arrive at our digs out in Glenamina Park here behind what used to be the Montrose Hotel. He would kick us up, the landlady would kick us out of bed, and we would go out, and Eugene McGee had this Vespa scooter, and the three of us would head off up to Belfield. So the training wasn't just quite the same high calibre as it was in those days. I might also just say really that Brian Dooher, is quite amazing for him to say that that veterinary was second for him, because I happened to be external examiner for 3 years, and Brian was in the third year that I was external examiner, and I never heard the like of him. And there wasn't a question that we asked him, Michael, that he just didn't not only know the answer, but he knew it in depth. It was just almost phenomenal. So if veterinary was second to him, his level of input into Tyrone football must have been absolutely amazing. So the other thing I might just say is, to finish off, because I said I wouldn't keep you long, is that I'm involved with a group in Northern Ireland of vets who are they're called Vet Support NI. They're volunteers, and in my checkered career, I ended up being trained as a business coach and a psychotherapist. I helped train a group of 12 vets who are now volunteers and who are listening ears for their colleagues. And whenever somebody who's distressed comes on, the first thing we ask them is how much exercise are they doing? And if they're not doing any exercise, we really persuade them to do 2.5 to 3 hours exercise a week, because it de-arouses them emotionally. It raises their serotonin levels, the happiness hormones, as high as most antidepressants. So the importance of sport, the importance of exercise for mental health is so hugely important. So I'm so delighted that this is being held here tonight, Michael. I think it's a wonderful thing, and it should encourage all students to get more involved in sport and the veterinary profession, because it is the single biggest thing that anybody can do to improve their mental health and well-being. So I just think it's absolutely brilliant.
Hear, hear.
There.
I think it's telling that Des chose to get up and speak about, Brian Dooher, one of his own heroes. You would have admired Brian playing football, and just from speaking to people tonight before dinner, I think it's a lovely thing to acknowledge your own. And, sometimes we forget to put our own people on a pedestal, and we can do sports awards and we can do sporting events, but actually to have a family from outside sport come together and recognise your sporting endeavours is very special, and you'd be surprised, it's quite rare. So, fair play, Michael, and your team and everybody here. I do think it's lovely, and for Dad, you've just pretty much summed up the message of the night, really, just that we're all here to acknowledge everybody's greatness. Brian, were you aware, or are you aware, that when you played football for so long and with such success, All-Ireland's, All-Stars, Ulster titles, the whole lot, that you were a role model for younger people mostly, but also for older generations?
No, you don't probably realise at the time you're living in a bubble, and I think anybody that tells you any difference probably lying. You're just so focused on the next game or the next training session around the corner. And it is, whenever you sit back and look at it now, you realise them things, and you realise how much it means to so many people, and how much enjoyment they get out of it, and how much enjoyment you bring to a lot of people. And probably now it's payback time. You're trying to get as many people involved and letting them experience, trying to put them in a place where they can experience some of what you did experience, because I thoroughly enjoyed it from start to finish, and still do. And
that's what I was going to ask you about, enjoying it, because sometimes sport, the way it's gone now, there's so much sports science and sports psychology and statistics, and how many miles did your man run in a match? But we'll say between 03, 05, 08 and the success that you had at All-Ireland level, your team really seemed like you were really enjoying your football and enjoying the bond that you had in the dressing room.
Definitely, and I think that bond that we have is something that's definitely should never be understated. Any team that is successful has a bond, because you'll never be successful without a team, because you're never going nowhere on your own. You know, we had a bond, and probably it was highlighted there last year. We had a reunion. It was last year, a 10-year reunion from 2008. And I walked into, it was in Letterkenny, I walked into a bar, and it was as if you walked back into the changing room again. You know, you might have seen a few people in 6 months or a year or 2 years, but the same banter was going on. It was just back to normal again, and it just showed the bonds that were there. And that's why we were successful. You know, you knew everybody was behind you, everybody was pulling the one way, and you could rely on everybody to deliver. And you know, we had leaders everywhere. We're very lucky that way. And any successful team has. If you look at Dublin now, they have 3 or 4, maybe 5 or even 5 or 6 or maybe more real kingpins for them that, you know, they'll always settle things down and drive it on to another level each time.
It's so true, isn't it, around, you know, you talk about bonds and you talk about, you know, not seeing people for 10 years and coming back to the old stories and having that connection with people. But, Ger, when you're playing, and you're the same, I'd say, you know, the dressing room that you were in, it's almost like having an automatic family or an automatic few fellas that have your back. If you're going through a tough time or whatever, that dressing room must have been important to that Clare team at the time as well.
Oh yeah, for sure, and it's continued with people complain about there's so many reunions of the Clare 92 football team. There's like 10-year reunions, 12-year reunions, 13-year reunions, and there's a WhatsApp group, and they just
make something up.
Yeah, they just want to get, you know, they want to get see you going to the golf in Lahinch, or, you know, are you going to, you know, the Clare qualifier match or something like that, and you know, it's just been, they're a great group really, and some of them, you know, just still think they're 21 or 22, particularly the way they act. Yeah.
Do you go to the matches still? Did you go down to Portlaoise last week?
Yeah, I was in Portlaoise, yeah. I was in Portlaoise, yeah.
I thought they were brilliant. They were so fit. Really, you know, sorry, Kevin, I actually thought they were going to take it. But they do seem to have, like that now, leaders.
Oh yeah, and a great manager, and consistently over the last few years, and they were very close this year. And you know, I still, you know, the passion still burns, and even though I live in Tipperary, and probably have young fellas playing, you know, and at underage level in Tipperary, it's still Clare is the spot for me.
Yeah, that does make sense. Frank O'Sullivan and Kevin Foley are here as well from Meath. Don't be shy, lads. Frank, your lads they've kind of chosen one sport each. Is that what happened in your house?
Yeah, we've got in our house a hurler for me, the footballer, and then Hughie plays with Leinster this year, so we've lovely variety in our game. But I one complaint against Kevin, actually.
Oh no, make it 2.
Well, one complaint that both Kevin and I, when we qualified, were working in Fermoy. So, and Sean Boylan was the manager, but I knew things weren't going well for me when the helicopter called for Kevin, courtesy of Keepak, and I had to get the bus up for training. So it's great to get that out in the public. And actually, you talk about external examiners. I think for me, Sean Boylan was the greatest person that taught me about herd health. He because I was part of his first big cull. So with that, I'll hand you over to Kevin.
Kevin, you're going to have to follow that one up with something really good.
I won't insult him, but I'll insult Colin O'Rourke because he'd probably insult everybody if he was here. Brian, I'm sure, knows that he can thank Colin O'Rourke for a lot of his successes, because Colin O'Rourke famously declared, as he usually does, that he knows everything. He declared that Tyrone would never win an All-Ireland with players like Brian Dooher playing. So that obviously came to pass. I'm quite glad that I was retired before Brian came around, because he would definitely have done the sales of Duracell batteries bad, because he would outrun the Duracell bunny any day. So I think I'm glad it was gone by that stage.
Is it true, were you really the Victoria Beckham of Meath football, flying in helicopters to training?
For a while, yeah, for a while.
Special treatment?
And I'm not fond of flying, I tell you that. Noel Keaton was the saviour there. I was driving up for Fermoy, and he said to me one day at the Curragh, he said, how are you getting up to training? And I said, I'm driving up. He said, I bought an old helicopter there. I'll call down for you if you like. And I said, yeah. So I was in the car park, and this thing was supposed to be picking me up at 6 o'clock, and I was there at 6 o'clock, 5 past 6, 10 past 6, and I said, this is a joke, someone's having fun with me. So next thing, this dot appeared in the sky and landed, and I think training was supposed to be 7:30 in Gormanstown. Got into this thing, and we seemed to be moving about 30 miles an hour, and I was thinking, there's not much point in me going up there if I'm going to be late. And I said to the pilot, I said, what speed are we doing? He said, 150 miles an hour. So I said, fair enough, we'll probably get there.
Can we get a microphone? Get a microphone down to Brian Mullins there. He's sitting straight in front of me, so you're not going to be able to escape at all, Brian. I know you're blessed among vets here tonight, but as head of sport and a football man yourself, do you ever survive or get onto the wrong end of a cull by Sean Boylan?
I would never really have had any run-ins with Sean. Sean was a very mild-mannered individual. He was
and were you?
Well, he was a bit of a contradiction as a Meath man, because there was very few of the mild and mannered, although Kevin could fit that category all right. Quiet thing, no. The conversation you're having with numerous individuals around the room is very apt, and as Des has said, the importance of exercise and involvement in sport is very appropriate to particularly modern life. I was fortunate enough that there was plenty of sports science around in the 70s and the 60s, and I don't think the phenomena of fitness and sports science is necessarily a recent aspect to GA games in particular. I always think there has been a very worthwhile and informative involvement by GA authorities and GA managers going back to the 1920s and 30s. I know from my own family on one side, having Kerry connections, that in the 1930s, Kerry were having squad training ongoing during the summer of their championship seasons. And so what Brian is trying to describe about the sense of family and the sense of group dynamic is very true. And the theme of tonight around vets who do a very important job, who do a very hard job, and it's really a vocation as much as a profession. The theme of being able to achieve in sport and also progress a profession is very, very laudable and very worthy of recognition, despite the fun and games that different helicopters provided and whatnot. It's a uniquely Irish thing that sport plays such an important part, not only in veterinary science, but across the other professions, law, medicine, teaching, everything like that. So I would like to also hear and acknowledge the contribution to that the other guests you have up on the stage, which it's interesting to hear the perspective of the wide range of athletes that veterinary science has produced.
Hear, hear. Brian is trying to work himself onto the Hall of Fame. I couldn't have put it better myself. We're the two outsiders, Brian, but we make a go of putting them all up on a pedestal, will we? Yeah. With that in mind, we might move on to horse racing, because we have Mr. Dermot Weld here tonight, which is a huge honour, Dermot, to have you here. And like that now, I mean, obviously you're so closely tied to equine events and to veterinary. Was it a natural career progression for you?
Yeah, I suppose it was. My mother and father were very involved. My father was a racehorse trainer. I rode as an amateur, and it was a logical progression to be. My father never wanted me to train racehorses, very wisely, and the only deal I had with him was that if I became a vet, he'd let me train racehorses, and that's how
So he kind of bribed you, basically.
More or less. And no, I don't regret it. I think it's been a huge help to my career. I think we're just talking about it at our table. Is the thing that's always interests me was the psychology and the mental aspect, because basically anybody can, in my opinion, train a racehorse. But I think it's the consistency and to appreciate the amount of stress that the individual horses undergo, and there's a whole lot more to it than maybe people think, just looking at a horse race and things like that and preparing and training for a horse. I've no doubt whatsoever my veterinary training was a huge help to me. And nowadays, I think in the early days it was a colossal help. And I think John Ox is here there, and John will agree with me, we had a huge advantage. But nowadays with modern technology, you can buy the food in prepared rations, you can get everything on the internet. So I think our advantage is dramatically diminished. But it's been a wonderful asset to be a vet. I think it's a great honour, and it has served me well around the world. And I have many, many happy memories of all funny incidents and things that happened to me, because I more or less put myself through college, and I rode as an amateur. And I was very fortunate to be 3 times leading amateur of Ireland when I was graduating. I think I was 17, 19 and 21, I was leading amateur. But I possibly earned more money riding as an amateur than most professionals did in those days, because I would only ride. Edward O'Brien Lynch stayed with me, and we stayed in single apartments, digs, everything you can think of, all over Dublin. Mostly based in the Navan Road, because 3rd year we had to go out to Abbottstown, and getting out there wasn't easy. And I remember one time Frank Austin was the lecturer, main man in pharmacology, and pharmacology used to be the hardest subject to pass. And it was very inconvenient for me, because I very often wanted to ride on a Thursday, and the tutorials and things were Thursday afternoon, and I had to come up to all sorts of ways of escaping. But I remember once we had to go a bit early because I was riding a horse that would win in Killarney, and Edward came with me, and we escaped anyway. And we were going a bit late, so we were going through, I think it was Castle Island, and I was driving, got stopped for speeding. So the only way out of it was to tell the guard that we'd win and be sure he backed the horse. And fortunately I did win, but on the way back, you're relaxed, you're happy, and you want to get back as quick as you can back to Dublin again. And naturally, you can guess that I was caught for speeding going back again. And unfortunately, the sergeant did not back the horse, and did not approve. And to tell you the times we're in, the car just about made it. In fact, the thermostat went when we got close to the Navan Road, and we walked home the last bit to our digs. But they were the days, if you know what I mean. And it was a wonderful time, and thoroughly, really, really proud that I became a vet. I think it's something we should all be very proud of.
I can't imagine that's the only time. I can't imagine that's the only time you pulled that one with the here guard, back that one there, and I'll sort you out later on.
Yeah, well, yeah, throughout life. And another occasion was I brought a horse to Vintage Crop, the first of my Melbourne Cup winners. And I suppose being a vet, it gives you confidence. You don't realise it, you don't talk about it. But at the back of it, it does give you great confidence to know that you've graduated after 5 years of very, very hard work. And indirectly, it does give you that little bit of confidence. And when I brought Vintage Crop in 1993 to win the Melbourne Cup, everybody said I was mad. It could never be. Everybody that was involved in the horse business, both in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere.
It had never been done, though, had it?
No, it had never been done before.
There you go.
And I got the idea when I qualified first, I went and worked in Australia. And that's where I always, you're having a drink at night time and you're trying to say European horses are better than Southern Hemisphere horses. And naturally, the Aussies all claimed that theirs was the greatest race and the Europes weren't any good, and so it goes. So I always wanted to bring a horse back. Quickly and briefly, had this horse. And decided it was time to have a crack at it. And quickly, to tell you a little story, eventually it was decided the horse was to go. It had never been done before. No horse had ever gone to race in Australia, in the Southern Hemisphere. And I spent about a year working on it because we had to change the flight path of the planes. And we had to change all the quarantine regulations in Australia. But anyway, that's another story. But on the day the horse was to leave Ireland, he was on there was a flight went once a week from Heathrow to Melbourne. It was a Cathay Pacific cargo flight, and we had to connect that. Quarantine is 2 weeks in Ireland, 2 weeks in Australia. It had to be done. Connecting plane from Dublin to Heathrow. Everything was arranged, 6 o'clock in the evening for the flight. But one thing, with all the meticulous planning I did, I forgot about fog. And the plane coming to pick up the horse was coming from Heathrow, and there was fog over Dublin. And the pilot, very kindly, he got as far as Liverpool to speak, and then he came up, flew over Dublin. The fog was pretty bad. He circled around twice. He had 2 attempts to land, and he couldn't. And he said he'd give it one more try, and if he got in, great, and if not. And I remember walking across the path from my house to where the stables where the horse was. I was actually relieved, because this whole thing is mad. And it'll save so much money, so much everything. I won't be perceived to be stupid. And, you know, it'll go away, and all the pressure will be gone, and I'm just dead lucky if he doesn't get in. I really had gone that far. Lo and behold, I got a call to say the pilot had got a hole in the fog into Dublin. The rest is history. The horse went down. From a gambling point of view, he was 28-1 because nobody thought he would win. He was 40 and 80-1 in Australia. Then he was 40-1. 2 quick stories. It was early 90s, you must remember, and right across the world, the economies were pretty poor, and recession was everywhere. And we're just coming out of recessions. And 2 little incidents about gambling. One guy in Australia, husband and wife, they came up to me immediately after the race. They were unbelievable. They had mortgaged their house, they'd run out of money, the house was gone, and the last few dollars they had, they backed vintage crop at 80-1 to win the Melbourne Cup. And actually, I get a letter every Christmas still from them. And naturally, I'm invited to stay in their house and live with them or whatever I want to do if I ever go to Melbourne. And the other was the true story of the story you can imagine of the guy that went to Australia. And a young guy was meant to be doing great and sending the word home, how well he was doing, making money, wonderful weather, great, everything. And in fact, he was doing pretty poor. He wasn't doing well. He didn't have a job. And he hadn't been home for 5 years. He wanted desperately to come home. He wanted to leave Australia, didn't have the money. And again, he either borrowed the money or got it, and he backed him at 40-1. And my biggest job was literally to pull him off me, because the guy was just in such a state that this horse, winning this race, had done so much for him. So there are 2 little stories.
Did you ever think, Dermot, and we'll get a microphone to John Ox as well. Did you ever think when you first started out, after you finished riding, you first started training, that you would get to, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 and more winners?
No, of course you don't. It's like, I suppose, in any sport, you hope you'll achieve certain things, and indeed, John has been wonderful what he's achieved. And we've both been very fortunate, and we're both realists how difficult the business that we're in and how tough and how hard it is. But I've been very fortunate. I've had a great staff all the way up. I've worked very hard. And as I said, my veterinary profession has been a huge help to me.
You said to me before we sat down for dinner as well that you're still enjoying it as much as you ever did.
Oh yeah, I think it's a great challenge, and I love a challenge. And again, I think it goes back to this, the confidence that one gets with your veterinary degree, the hard work that you've put in to be a vet. It stands you in great stead, and it definitely gives you the encouragement to go forward. I can't put it into words, but it just gives you that go-to to know you can succeed if you work hard enough. And I work very hard because I was busy riding horses, as you heard, missing tutorials, so I had to work pretty hard. I had to keep myself very fit. I used to put on a sweater. Until the height I am, I had to run quite a bit to keep my weight down. And when I was finishing study, which I worked, Edward and I, we used to work pretty hard. We'd study, stop studying, and then I'd go for a run, come back, have a bath, probably go out dancing 4 or 5 nights a week. So
we'll do a bit of that later on.
You kind of work, you work hard to be a vet, and you get that work ethos, and you carry it through your life, I think.
Yeah, it's a work ethic. I think sport is a bit like that as well. You talked about discipline and patience. John, it strikes me that, you kind of have to have that mix, and that Dermot had it in spades.
Yeah, well,
it's a bit of a grind, you know. I think veterinary is a hard career. You know, I know lots of vets. I never practiced as a vet, but I know lots of vets, and it's a tough life, tough physical life. Ours is a bit the same, you know. It's 7 days a week, and you know you've got a daily routine, early mornings, you know, long day. But it's good for us, you know. I like it. I enjoy it still. Just the same, I think, as Dermot does. I like the daily routine, even though it's 7 days a week. It's you know, you wake up in the morning because you know you're waiting for the alarm to go off. You know, you're up and out, and you know, you get frustrated at times. Things aren't going so well, and you think, God, you know, when am I going to win another race? You know, and but you get out in the morning. You're out with the horses and with the staff, and you know, you get a lift when you see the morning's work unfold, and you're directing it and looking at the horses, watching, planning their next move. You know, you get wrapped up in the job, and if you didn't like it, you couldn't do it. But when you like it, you'll keep doing it. And you'll work 7 days a week because you like what you're doing, and you get a lift from it.
Can you tell us something, or can you put into words what Dermot Weld has done for the sport of horse racing in his time as a trainer, I suppose, more than anything else? Because that's why we're here, I suppose, is to acknowledge the achievements of all our veterinary greats.
Well, sure, Dermot's been, you know, as you say, I mean, you asked him, did he think he'd train 3,000 winners when he started? I can tell you he damn well did think he was going to. He said about it, you know, so it was no surprise to him. But no, well, Dermot, of course, will always be famous for the Melbourne Cups, and I think it's been a great achievement. He not only won it once, he won it twice. And he was very unfortunate not to win it 3 times with Vinnie Rowe, who was second to a wonder mare who won 3 in a row, and Vinnie Rowe gave her weight. So he's almost pulled it off 3 times, which I think is his greatest achievement, that he'll always be well remembered for. And he's been, you know, consistent, and he's, you know, what more can I say? You know, he's been Ireland's most successful, consistent trainer over many years.
You're here. It deserves a round of applause, I think, doesn't it? Derek McGrath, the man to my right. I mean, you're here to talk about rugby, but as CEO, recently appointed, well, a couple of years now, of the Curragh, you're no stranger to Mr. Well's achievements either.
No, I think I've benefited from being a veterinary surgeon, that Dermot gives me the time of day, because we've made his life a misery, and probably John's as well, actually, because they both train at the Curragh. So we've been doing 2 years of development, so it's been a nightmare. But for me, look, being involved in sport, like all of us here, everybody in the room, being up close and watching the masters of a sport to practice, and I have the privilege of literally standing watching these people train on a daily basis, magnificent athletes, but they're the guys who have to train. And I mean, John and Dermot, and again, back to what Brian said, you know, the way Irish sport and Irish sports people and the success that they show and demonstrate on an international stage. I mean, the example of what Dermot and John have done worldwide, they are probably more revered than they are even in their own countries. The respect with which they're both held for what they've achieved is immense. And, you know, for me, it's been a joy watching it. While I've been making their life a misery, it's been good fun watching what they do and learning a lot more about what they do and why it's so special.
I'm sure they don't agree that you're making their lives a misery.
No, they do. They do.
How did you end up? I'd love to know, you know, because you're CEO of the Curragh now, was it your veterinary background that brought you in that direction, having come from, you know, European Rugby Cup, you know, arranging Heineken Cup and all of that, working in rugby and then going back to the Curragh job? Was it because you had the veterinary background that drew you that direction?
It was part of it, but it wasn't the driver. I suppose the driver was the attractiveness of the project. It was an iconic project, an amazing race course that had the track but just didn't have the facility to match. And what appealed to me was that it was a combination of interests. And it was very similar to the way European rugby was organised, in that you had, at European rugby, you had the clubs and the unions sitting around the table from 6 countries. And in this case, you had HRI, the governing body, you had the regulator, the turf club, and then you had all the private investors who had agreed to work together to produce this magnificent facility. And that was the first major appeal, because I thought, if you can get all those people around the table, you're going to succeed, because you've got the right people, the right energy, and the right vision to make it achieve. So that was really the driver. But the fact that it was in horse racing and the veterinary interest clearly was something that I suppose allowed me to feel much more comfortable very quickly.
Speaking of European rugby, keep a hold of that microphone, and actually, Fiona, you might pick one up. Fiona O'Brien won Six Nations Championship with Ireland in 2015. Anybody has any little stories they might want to take a microphone there? But talk to me about your time, first of all, in college, Fiona, because you were in UCD a little before that. Were you late enough coming to rugby in life?
Yeah, it was UCD that I started playing in. I had played, basketball and a few other sports, but never to any great level. My brother always maintained rugby was what I should play, because I was vicious, was his words, and I was obviously strong. So he insisted on me playing, and it was in third year actually while I was in UCD. So that I started playing, and say when I first qualified in my first year, I was basically just about treading water in mixed practice, so I didn't play. But then quickly realised the value of sport and that I needed it if I was to stay sane. And so I went back again and played provincial with Ulster and ended up, getting involved in the Ireland team, which I inherited that Six Nation medal from a lot of players that went before me. I had very little to do with it really, but it was the work of the crew before me that, gave us that success. And just to make the point, when I was in college in 2008, Brian was at peak winning All-Irelands, and I obviously don't have a GA background at all, and football wasn't my sport. And I remember always taking huge interest in Brian because he was a vet, and having that interest when I was in the college. I was the proud owner of a Tyrone jersey as well as a Down jersey. I'd have to say I was I had no problem if anyone was successful, but I always admired what he did, and I always took great pride in the fact that I was in the same profession as someone that was that successful. And even my folks are here, and they were laughing when I said Brian was coming. I'd never met Brian, and I was so excited because he was someone that I did definitely look up to. And what was really interesting when we were chatting was all of us have such a, Irish people obviously in general, have such a fascination in sport, but we're so intrigued to talk to each other. I was mad to hear about Susie in an individual sport and how she does it with veterinary. And actually, I, in first year, in a preclinical EMS, so the whole point was, I knew nothing about horses, and the whole point was that you'd go and learn basic, put on a bridle, but that wasn't good enough for me, and I ended up going to John Ox's yard, where I knew absolutely nothing about horses, absolutely diddly squat, and I followed him around for 2 weeks, but I still talk about how meticulous he was in his approach, and I still remember him checking every horse every morning, every evening, and his approach to, I think, did you buy your hay in Canada or something? And I remember being totally intrigued by that it was that, did it have the consistency of crop, and the whole, that meticulous nature of sport always appealed to me. And it's magic to be here and to talk to different people and see all their approach, in that way to all the sports, and that it all lends to itself. And it's even more magic then to be in the same profession as them. It's magic.
It's like perfectionists. I often think sports people are perfectionists and they don't settle for anything. Buy your hay in Canada, have your knee x-rayed by a vet, go the extra mile, get the extra %. You talked about your introduction to rugby, and it's really interesting when you talk to women who are involved in rugby now. Yep. In the last 10 years, a lot of them actually came from other sports, and it was like they craved something extra. Because Jenny Murphy has spoken about that as well. She would have been a teammate of yours, a squad mate of yours, and she was playing Gaelic football, and there wasn't enough physicality. She was, I think it was UL she was playing with, and again, her college introduced her to the sport. Is it a little bit more strategic now, or is it still ad hoc? What way are we?
I think there's a combination. So at Belvedere, we'd be used to having, at one stage we would have had 10 of our playing squad involved in an Irish setup. So we would have had a huge amount of internationals, but equally at the start of the season, you could have had a player who'd never played before, who would have transferable skills, yeah, maybe from Gaelic football or another sport, but not necessarily rugby. And, you know, we still would have some of those players that would come to the club who haven't played underage. But there is, recently I work in Glenealy, and I was asked recently to go to an underage session in Wicklow to take, I think it was under 12s. And I was used to, you know, helping to coach some of our new girls, and I was, you know, introducing, like even just talking in a broad sense, we'll say we're doing a ruck and drill, and their skills, like their understanding of the game was already considerably more, like their training age was already higher than some of the girls who had entered. So I definitely think it can only benefit the game. I would imagine I would have loved to have had the opportunity to have played since I was younger.
Derek, you know, coming from the men's game, do you feel like Fiona, I mean, I know Alyssa's here, and we have a few of student rugby players here as well with UCD. In fact, if there's a microphone, we might spread them around, down around the tables. But Derek, we'll talk about the men's game in a moment, but the Women's World Cup was actually here. I reported on it a couple of years ago. This was the dining hall for media. The food was fantastic. Not as nice as tonight. Did you feel in the last few years the movement of change for the women's 15s game, or do you feel like it's lost momentum, or where do you think it is now?
I think there's probably two answers to it. There's the 15s and the 7s. I think the 15s is a struggle. There's no doubt it's had its issues. But the 7s game, I suppose, has just expanded, but on the men's game as well, in terms of the global aspect. And there's that, I suppose, energy that's sucking the game globally, which is expanding the game into new territories. But as a father of 3 girls that played basketball, not mostly, but so I've been watching women's sport for years, and I'm only delighted to see rugby now becoming so important from across the gender sphere, which is, I suppose, for me, been so involved in different sports. I love the fact that basketball was almost 50-50 in terms of split, in terms of participation, and you know, rugby is a long way back, but I think it's improving and it's getting there very fast. And I think the fact that the 15s and 7s, I think, is going to accelerate that. 15s is one, and we've seen it in other countries as well. You've seen the English example of how they've challenged to stick with 15s. I think it does have its challenges, but the energy is there now. I think, as you mentioned, it's the next generation that's probably going to take the next push.
Speaking of the next generation, we have 2 UCD players sitting down at the table there, current students as well, of veterinary nursing, I think it is. UCD women, Sarah Glynn and Alex Coneen, is it?
Yeah.
How are you doing? Were you aware of Fiona and, you know, other players? Like you spoke about Brian Dooher and looking up to him when you were studying. Are you aware of the calibre of veterinary people in rugby?
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely since the World Cup, there's been a huge increase. I mean, I'm here 3 years now, and in my first year, I think there was 40 girls max training with women's rugby, and now it's up to, we're getting 120, 130 sign-ups each year. So it's definitely growing, and I think things like the World Cup and, you know, big events that stand out like that are definitely, you know, they definitely make people want to play it more, and it's being broadcasted more, it's on TV more, and it really, it proves that, like, women are really progressing. And I think especially in agriculture as well, it's a funny story. I got a call in April, so I was the president of the women's rugby in UCD last year, and for this coming year as well. And we have a colours game against Trinity every April, so it goes back and forth. It was in UCD this year, and we put out our squad for the team, or for the match. And I got a call a few days later from the Farmers Journal, and they said, "God, we're amazed that nearly half the team is women in agriculture, because we have the names of the players and then their degree. So between veterinary medicine, veterinary nursing, and agricultural science, there was, I think, 9 out of 23 were women in agriculture." So they kind of said at that stage it was a bit late to do a coverage on it, but they said to get in contact in September, and they'd come and do a big spread on the Farmers Journal of us. So I think
forward
that's
to that.
Yeah.
Just make sure you get to pick the clothes, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
You just wouldn't know what they put you in. Elise is down there as well. Do you have a microphone, Elise? No? We might just get one over to you. We'll keep going with the rugby chat. In the meantime, Elise is down there in the front table there. Derek, where is the men's game, the Irish game? We're coming up to a World Cup now. As someone who's not immediately involved with Joe Schmidt or the squad, Where are we? Because I think we've fallen behind a little bit, have we, in the last 12 months in terms of our expectations?
Everyone is hoping Joe has a plan. There's no doubt, I think, that if you look back at last November when we beat the All Blacks, I mean, that was a huge peak. There are a number of players now who undoubtedly have passed through their peak. And if you look at the stats, you can see that those key players are either not playing or they're injured or the performance isn't where you'd want it to be. But we have always doubted Joe Smith, and yet he's always produced. And while I'm not involved, I'm very closely attached to watching my nephew Luke McGrath, who's in the squad, and here's hoping that Luke will make Japan. But it's definitely a challenge. But you know, since 2015, Joe Smith has been trying to produce a squad with expanded skills, expanded durability and endurance. Because the World Cup, if you look at the short gap between each of the games, the fact that their performance now, Ireland are exceptionally lucky, I think, with the pool draw that they've got. But when you go and your second game is against Japan, you might have thought traditionally that's an easy game, but they're at home, and we remember what they did in 2015. So I think no game is easy. So it's I think an amazing opportunity for the Irish rugby team to come back, but there's a bit like poor old Rory McIlroy, the level of expectation on the Irish team this year is probably needs a bit of tempering, which it got through the Six Nations.
Yeah, I think it did, but sometimes in a situation like that, when you have a man like Joe Schmidt in charge, who is a perfectionist as well, and there's definitely an element of fear in the dressing room, good fear, nervous fear, because he is, it's hard to put your finger on it, he's ruthless, he's a perfectionist, he knows what he wants, he knows how to get it. Not the worst thing in the world not to go in as, you know, second favourites, third favourites. They're kind of going in under the radar a little bit. And if he does have a plan up his sleeve, this is the time to unleash it.
He's an amazing coach in that he's everything you've said he is. But, you know, not unlike the people in this room at the highest level of performance. They always have that extra bit of genius. And his genius is that not only does he know what he wants to achieve, but he can communicate that to the players to the extent that they know exactly what their role is in delivering on that. And that's pretty unique. And you hear some of the techniques that he uses. Like in November, he got the squad together for 2 nights. And after the first day's session, he had the team together, and he brought in a Japanese interpreter. So the squad all figured that this was good idea. We've got the World Cup this year. We're going to Japan, learn a few words in Japan and a few rugby terms. The next day's training session started where Joe said, no English, everything has to be in Japanese. And he wanted to test their ability to respond under fatigue conditions. And that was the level. So there was a plan.
See?
And this is why he's different.
Yeah, there you go. I wouldn't like to be coming up against him.
No, but, you know, we look, I remember seeing him in Millennium Stadium when he was training Leinster, where they were 22-9 down, I think, at halftime, and it looked like game was over. There was Leinster people taking their scarves off. They were walking out of the stadium almost. And Joe Smith came up the lift after halftime, and the doors just opened as he was going back to his box, and he just put his thumbs up. And that was halftime, and they were out the door, stuffed, and they came back and they won, as we remember, in great style. But that is the genius, that he can see these things. So not many people have it, but some of the people up here clearly do as well. So,
Fiona, Elise, do you have a microphone now? Yeah. Did you guys have a coach like that? Ever? The microphone's not on, but...
No.
There it is.
No.
In a word.
Yeah. But actually, the current coach at Leinster is really, really good. Ben Armstrong, he's all for team culture and kind of thinks a little bit outside the box. He always says that he doesn't have very good ideas himself, but he's good at stealing other people's ideas. So that's what we get, which is like, he's doing pretty well so far. We won the Interpros last year, and the Interpros start again in a month's time, so we'll see.
I think in the women's game, what is starting to happen is that female coaches are starting to, like retired players are starting to come. So at Belvo, we now have Ailish Egan and Nora Stapleton and Miles Riley, who are all former internationals, and they're the entirety of our coaching staff. And I think Blackrock have done similar. They've Tanya Ross. There's a few of, we'll say, retired players now coming back into AIL, which is what's needed. And it's not that, you know, it's just traditionally we've at times had a lad who played maybe J4 rugby and thought it'd be go crack to coach the girls, like. And we probably haven't benefited from the level of coaching that we needed. And you know, like despite maybe the effort that you put in, the time that you put in, you maybe at times didn't get the coaching that you needed. And I think that'll change. And I think it's, you know, our crop of players, and it's that, you know, 2020, and it's been involved, and it's, you know, and I think that is changing. I think female players are going back in, and I think we'll benefit from the coaching from that.
I think the coaches is a big thing when it comes to females. Can I ask both of you, before we move on to the next sport, the World Cup, a lot of it was played here 2 years ago. Did you guys feel that was a missed opportunity to make a bit of progress at home?
Yeah, it was a massively missed opportunity, because the previous World Cup was when Ireland beat New Zealand and they came 4th in the world. And the development phase from that was to start paying coaches and to go to high performance, which actually resulted in people getting less resources and less coaching. And so from the very beginning of that World Cup build-up, it was just going to go downhill. So unfortunately, the public had got behind it because of the success of the 2014 World Cup. Everyone was interested, and then when it came to actually performing, everything, the culture and the setup had been dismantled from above, really, and that's why the result was what it was, even though the support was there, which is really disappointing. And I still think it's kind of at the same phase at the moment. So,
well, the trend has to be positive, though. I mean,
yeah.
Like if you look at the World Cup, the ladies soccer World Cup, the viewership that got, the support it got. You look at
broke records.
You
Yeah.
look back to horse racing. Rachel Blackmore, you've probably heard of, and the success of that. And in horse racing, it's incredible, because women and men competing on the same level, no handicap, no difference. So. It really is growing, and I think while there might be a disappointment right now, I think the trend has to be seen to be positive in terms of participation.
Yeah, the trend is definitely positive, but like you say, individual sports. And we'll move on now to cycling, and Susie Mitchell, who's here with us tonight, because, you know, your sport, it's a bit like tennis, swimming, athletics, triathlon. You do compete on an even stage, and you do compete at the same events. Fiona, you said you had some questions for Susie about individual sport earlier on.
I interrogated her at the table.
You?
We were sitting together. Yeah, I was totally intrigued.
Because Susie, the first thing that you were talking to me outside about was coming back after having a baby and training like to be damned after a C-section and competing 4 months later. And I just wanted to turn around and go home. I felt so inadequate. Because the same thing happened to me, and I think I lay on a bed for about a year.
Yeah, well, I tried track cycling for the first time in New Zealand, and I fell in love with the sport, and I just set my sights then on competing in the World Masters a year later. I had a great plan, and unfortunately there was a bump along the road, which was me getting pregnant. So after a brief moment, I decided I was going to look into my veterinary knowledge and do a bit of research and come up with a plan to train all the way through pregnancy, which I did. And unfortunately then there was another bit of a bump because I had to have an emergency section, so that wasn't part of the plan. So I turned to my animal friends, and I looked at the cows and the dogs and stuff post cesarean sections jumping around in the fields. So I was like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. So I threw the piece of advice, the 6 weeks, don't do anything for 6 weeks, out the window, and I got back on my bike after about 3 weeks, because I decided with a bit more kind of research that most of the wound healing was done by then. So I gave myself the go ahead and the green light to get back on the bike. And then at 6 weeks, post having the baby, I won a bronze national medal in a track event in Ireland. So I took heart that maybe the hormones were having a good effect. So I went hell for leather and trained hard right to the Masters 4 months later, and then I won the individual pursuit. And I was absolutely delighted. It was like the best feeling I've ever had, just standing on the podium and hearing the Irish national anthem, because I kind of came to sport a bit later in life. So I kind of went straight in at Masters level. And people were like, was having the baby not the best day of your life? And I was like, no, winning the World Masters was the best day of my life. So.
There's definitely something in the water in your building, Michael. First of all, a round of applause for Susie, because that's just insane. Second order of business, before we talk again to Susie, is just a word on mental health. Brian, you mentioned it and the importance of sport and endorphin release and everything, but also do not think that is normal. It is okay not to be winning medals 6 weeks after you have an emergency section. I had an emergency section. I couldn't drive for about 2 months. I couldn't drive a car. It was too sore. That's phenomenal. That effort is absolutely phenomenal.
I was really lucky because I was so fit. Like I really didn't. I bounced back really quickly. I was really lucky.
It's really unusual, though. Can we just? It's definitely really unusual.
Yes. I was a bit crazy, I have to admit.
But maybe it is something about, you know, and you talked about the discipline and the commitment to study and the hard work, and there's definitely something in that as well, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. But as well, I think like one person gave me a very good piece of advice when I was training and getting back to fitness again post the baby. It's just like, listen to your body, and I think that's like the best piece of advice anyone could give you, and everyone's different. So, you know, my body was telling me to go for it, so I did, and it worked out well for me, thankfully. And
were you competing?
The baby was fine as well.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. You had to babe. What's the baby's name?
Yeah.
You should ask about the baby. Okay, grand. Back to cycling. Did you compete when you were in college, or did you have a support structure here as well? I'm interested to know.
I kind of always stayed in touch with sport, and I used to do a bit of mountain biking, but I never really raced on a bike until I kind of tried track cycling, and I just got a love for the speed, and I really enjoyed it, and I really wanted to race then, but I hadn't actually really raced properly before that. So, okay. But I had stayed in touch with sport all the way through, which can be a challenge at times because it's so busy. You know, it's such a busy degree. And
you went again in 2015. Had you had another baby by then?
No, that was before I had the second baby. So I decided to have one more crack at it in 2015, and I targeted a different event. It was more of an endurance, kind of a tactical event called a points race. I don't expect any of you to know what that was, but basically it's like about 15 minutes, and you sprint every so often for points. And I won that, and I was absolutely thrilled. Now, it couldn't quite top the first time, because the first time just had that whole feeling of, you know, after just having a baby and like proving I could do it. Mm-hmm. But the second time is great as well. But I just felt so lucky to have been able to do it and to have the support at home. In fairness to my husband, who's not here tonight, he was really great. Much as he gave out about it at the time, he really did step up. So.
Have any of you ever been to a major championships in track cycling? Probably no. It's phenomenal. I went last year to the Europeans, and it is, I mean, you think hurling is fast. This is so dangerous, and the velodrome obviously is steep, and it's at an angle, and the bikes, is it the scratch race or the individual pursuit? Which one is the one that is just, they come over the hoarding and they're broken bones everywhere?
That's usually the scratch race.
Scratch race. The scratch race, if you get a chance to Google it, it is the most chaotic race I've ever seen, because they just go round and round and they clump up on each other, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, well, usually you don't there isn't that many accidents. So
I saw a few, and I was there for a day.
Yeah.
Well, but it was the European Championship, so maybe they were going hell for leather. Yeah, there's a bravery element there.
Well, we do have a lot of actually very promising talent, young talent coming up through the system. So I think we could potentially, get Olympic medals within the next, say, 10, 15 years in this sport. If we maybe get an indoor velodrome, which would be a big help.
I was just going to say there was a really strong Irish team, and there is again this year, but they need a velodrome in Ireland, don't they?
Basically, yeah.
In the Republic.
We do have a lovely outdoor velodrome there in Crumlin, and it is really nice, but unfortunately it's weather dependent because it's outdoors and the banking isn't the same. So while a lot of the skills can transfer, it's very hard to compete indoors if you haven't got the practice indoors. So, the site is there, and the planning has been approved and everything, so hopefully we'll have a velodrome in the next couple of years in Ireland, and we'll start to see some serious medals coming in. So.
I want to say welcome as well to Marika Beltman, who's here, who's you have a microphone. Oh, you're on the ball. Can we turn on Marika's microphone there, please? So, Marika, you have represented Ireland at European level as well. I just want to mark that, because again, that's a huge achievement, and the cross-section of sport in the veterinary department here in UCD is phenomenal. When was it that you were in action?
It's a good question, actually, because it's 3 years in a row. So,
because we had a photograph.
14, 15 and 16. 14 Europeans, 15 Europeans on 3 levels, 16 Europeans in the world.
And for people who don't know you, you're on staff here, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay, so do you get to use there's a bit of a benefit, isn't there, to having that
There is
world-class sports centre, Brian?
Brian and I were joking earlier that he saw me at 6 o'clock this morning because I was in training, and he seen me again. He was like, I saw you already today. So yes, very lucky that now we have the pool here in UCD and a first-class gym, which basically gives me absolutely no excuse not to train, which I then do as well. You know, I do take the opportunity to go in, and like opening times are really like early and late, so there is no excuse not to train.
When you're in a minority sport like that, in an environment where, you know, people like Susie are making a name for themselves as well on the world stage, do you kind of look out for each other and try and follow each other's success?
No, it's really funny because I remember Susie as a student, and that sounds like that I'm so old, but that's not it. But
I think I'm older than you are. Actually.
You are. Because that was our discussion when like I was an intern, Susie was in the first final year, just two other final years of that year here, which is quite funny. It makes you realise that you're here a while. But yeah, of course, I meet Susie because Susie does every now and then dibs in and out of triathlon, and as every good cyclist does actually really, really well at it. But I get old because I have a lot of friends that compete in triathlon and are now of the baby having stage, let's call it that way. And they're all kind of in this, what do we do with the baby, and what do we do, and can we still train, and can we still compete? And I go, you know what, I have this colleague, you know, she's really cool. She became world champion. And you know what, she didn't just become world champion, she also did a triathlon 6 weeks post-cesarean as well. That was her second baby. You forgot to mention that, Susie.
Did you tell them to buy my book?
I did. I always plug your book. I always plug your book, and then I have to plug Maura's book as well. But I plug both your books just to give people the idea, like, you know, to give, like, it is also not, I know what you're saying, as in it is really hard after having a baby, but in general, I think as you progress through the age groups, you can actually, it's like the saying in us is like, okay, how do we get better? And basically all of us say, well, all the ones that are better than us, most of them have had a baby, but that's a huge sacrifice to make for the sport, so we're not quite sure whether we want to go that far.
Well, yeah, it's interesting what you're saying there, because I found for my mental health, like getting out and training was a huge thing for me, because I was really shocked. When I had the baby, it was like, oh my God, my life is over. I couldn't get over the shock of it. I remember looking out the window at people cycling past thinking, I'll never get on my bike again. I actually felt like that. So for me to actually, when I got back on the bike, even just really easy going at the start, just to get out and get the fresh air and just get away for like an hour, it was so good for my mental health. And like for anybody, just to do even a little bit, like, so sport, we're come back to this topic again and again, but it's just so important for mental health, like at any stage, you know.
It's my one saying was that people say, Mariah, you must be mad to do this. And I always go, well, you wouldn't want to see me without this, because I'll be a lot madder and totally unbearable.
Exactly. I think everybody in the room could probably concur with that. That's how important sport is. I also need a new trainer, so I'm going to get you later, Susie, to give me a few tips. I'm going to move on to hurling now. We have Shane McGuckin and Sue Rackard, and I really appreciate your patience. When you have a room with so many fantastic sporting ambassadors, somebody has to go first and somebody has to go last, so thank you for your patience. It's funny, Sue, I was in Croke Park the other day, and there is a kit man, and some of the guys from the village in Kilkenny will know Rackard Cody. He was sitting in the stand, and I was passing by about to do some interviews, and for some reason Nicky Rackard's name was in my head, and this man's name is Rackard Cody, and I know him for years. And I said, hello, Nicky. Like, not the man's name, not the man's first name, not the man's second name, but Nicky Rackard's name just came into my head. And I suppose he's so synonymous with hurling, Sue. Did you grow up in like in a shadow, or was it more of a privilege?
A bit of both, I suppose, and I'm very happy to wait to the end here as a complete imposter on this panel of fantastic athletes, and I've achieved nothing except that I happen to work in the school and I have genetic heritage that gets me sitting here. But I'm very proud to be here to, represent Nicky. It was extraordinary, really. As a youngster growing up, they were so famous that Uncle Nicky and my dad and the other brother, Bobby, who played with significant success, there was a fourth who played, they really were legends in the county and had brought honours to Wexford that were really unprecedented, I think. You know, we've had a very sporadic history with success with hurling in Wexford, and although we're going well at the moment. So it was quite amazing growing up. And I think one of the things was that we knew they were really famous guys, but we used to get a bit bored with it because everywhere that we go, people would be talking to them and talking about matches, and we just go, for God's sake, you literally start glazing over. And you know, of course, they were dad and they were your uncle, so they were just stupid and irrelevant as far as you were concerned some of the time. So it was kind of funny growing up. But one story I do remember from being a kid was we were on our school bus coming home, and there was a different bus driver this particular day, and he took a detour with the bus and stopped the bus at this place, and then asked me and my two sisters to get off the bus. So we were taken off the bus, brought into somebody's house, and pointed at and going, "These are Billy Rackard's children." And it all sounds very dodgy now.
Do you want to kiss their feet?
But we were taken off the bus and kind of brought in as these prizes, and they looked at us and kind of, you know, ooh, and then we were put back on the bus and went home. So I remember thinking, gosh, yeah, these guys are fairly famous, you know, so it was great. It was amazing. And we're hugely proud of Nicky, and obviously with the statue to him in Wexford that we have now, which is just beautiful, and a huge honour. And the fact that he still remains the highest scorer in the championship all these years later is just remarkable.
To have inspired as well that 96, you know, the passion in Wexford is phenomenal for hurling. They absolutely go bonkers. It's like Roscommon football, I often think. They just go absolutely insane for hurling. But they would have inspired that 96 team, and there's definitely a little bit of that stirring again. And Davy Fitz, no better man to instill a kind of bit of passion.
Absolutely. And there is, and I mean, having said the success is sporadic, the passion remains. And I remember in 96, for me it was fascinating when they won. I mean, I was at all the matches bar one, and I was with my dad, and what was fascinating as well was just to get a sense of what it must have been like for them back in the 50s when Wexford were winning. And when you consider, you know, people's sports interest wasn't diluted by other sports, really. The hurling guys were huge. So it was really amazing to see, and we went to so many, because he was asked to go and speak, you know, as one of the Rackards, about the success, and just to get that passion everywhere, literally at every crossroads. And Shane obviously knows a lot about that. But yeah, there's an amazing passion and love for hurling in Wexford consistently.
Shane, I don't know if you remember in the 90s, or maybe it was after the 90s, Dennis Walsh wrote a book called The Revolutionary Years. If you haven't read it, pick it up. It's fantastic, because it's all about, you know, the Clares and the Wexfords and the Offalys winning all these All-Irelands in the 1990s, and it completely transformed the game, and it changed history, and it changed the route. Now, the bigger counties came back shortly afterwards, but are we seeing that again now, this revolutionary years where we're seeing a much wider championship, a much more open competition?
Well, hopefully. I mean, the round-robin system seems to be delivering on getting different counties. You have 3 different counties in the semi-finals this year. Just on the records there, you know, working in the neighbouring practice to Nicky Rackard, he's still remembered as a vet as well, I can tell you, a big, strong man, and what he was able to do. And the underage board and a skull competition to this day is still called the Rackard League. But talking about the Clares and you know, the 90s, we always blame Ger Kelly for a change in hurling from the point of view of he was the first one to get them fit. You know, we didn't train very hard, but we had a good bit of skill, and that wasn't good enough anymore in 95. We won in 94, but lost in 95. And it was the fitness and the strength of the Clare players, I think, that you know, got them over the line that time.
I was wondering when Ger was talking about John Maughan on sand dunes and running them up and down, was it Ger or John started it? Ger Kelly or John Maughan? I don't know who started that sand dune running.
Maybe John Maughan started it, but Ger Kelly certainly carried it through. Yeah.
But it totally changed the game. Like you say, the fitness levels went through the roof, and the physicality as well. They were so strong.
Yeah, and the other story I remember about that time, and just looking at the screen there, I don't know if Jack Bootman was the only vet to be a president of the GAA, but in 95 was the first year that the new Hogan stand was open, and the two teams met for a reception after the match. And then traditionally, as well as that, the two teams meet for lunch in the Burlington or somewhere like that on the Monday after the match. And Lindy and I met Jack Bootman after the lunch on Monday. That was his first year as president of the GAA, presenting the two cups or whatever. And he was after being at a function on Saturday evening, and he was at the function on Sunday, and he was at the lunch on Monday. And we just met him going into the lift, and he said, "I'd love a rasher sandwich and a mug of tea." That's the type of man he was. He wasn't into the functions and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
It's gone the other way entirely now.
Yeah.
What about Offaly? What's after happening to them?
Yeah, it's not good. I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that question, but yeah, they're a bit in free fall. I mean, it's a small population, small hurling population, and you know, with very little underage success. I mean, talking about Wexford, it was 34 years since they won the Leinster Minor when they won it last year. Offaly are 19 years now since they won a minor one, but you know, they have no exceptional players like they had at that time to carry the team over, you know, and it could be a long road back.
It could, but you know, you talk about passion, and Sue mentioned it. Sometimes that's actually what's kind of falling away as well. You'd wonder, is that what's lacking? And obviously you're competing with football in the county as well. Yeah, but it is a small county, and you know, you need a bit of success. I mean, when we won that time, we were coming off winning our first 2 All-Irelands ever, and then we won 3 minors in 4 years, and the colleges and the vocational schools. We had won all those competitions, you know, and we were used to beating Kilkenny and the bigger teams that time, but you know, the young players now in Offaly are not getting that experience, and it's very hard to get the belief and you know, to get them that little bit extra over the line. I'm really conscious that we don't actually have any camogie or ladies football ambassadors on the stage, but Mary Dwan is down there, if we could pass the microphone over, representing Dublin. Hi Mary, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. You must have an old story for us.
Oh, there's always stories, and I remember when Shane was here, he was an intern or a house surgeon at the time, and he was mad into the hurling, and I'd been playing camogie all the time, and I'd kind of fallen out in love with Dublin camogie anyway, but Shane knew that I could poke a ball around, so it was like, come on out and play. So Ger was talking about the training that he used to do and go up and a little jog around Herbert Park. That was grand. That was a good bit of training, but every lunchtime we'd be up with the hurls and the slitters and poking around in Herbert Park. It's a lot of it, and I'd have to thank Shane because I kind of got the bug back again. And like, he was so passionate about Offaly hurling and, you know, the whole championship, and the buzz was there, and I thought, geez, I might get this county stuff a lash again. So we did, and we actually won an intermediate All-Ireland that year. And of course I was delighted. The first thing I had to do when I got off the bus at 2 o'clock in the morning was phone Shane. Shane, we won. It's all down to you.
I say he was delighted with you.
Oh, he was this, that's great, Mary, I'll see you tomorrow. So that was fun. I also remember his wife Lindy there, who would have been a work colleague of mine, and in a couple of years I said, how are things going? I said, oh, that bloody hurling is on again. The next thing you know, the hurl will be back in the bed. Shane had this trick that the sports psychologists would use today, you know, keep something close to you to remind you of your passion and your form and what you're for. So it shows Lindy got heaved over and the hurl was in the bed.
It's a good point you touch on though, Mary, about, you know, Shane inspired you to pick up the hurl again and get back into the game that you love. You know, all of you in the room you obviously have your veterinary family, but you still have your sporting bonds, and I can see it, you know, even in the stories and the connections. That's kind of what tonight is all about, and almost, you know, stoking that fire and remembering all of those good times. So fair play, Mary, for stoking that up.
We had good times, and I'm sure that we're going to continue to have good times.
Oh, they absolutely are. I have absolutely no doubt.
I'd say I speak from everybody else in the room. Like, a lot of us are well over what's considered our prime, but I think we all still feel about 23 or 24 inside, except the legs don't agree. Apart from the master cyclist, we all have to aspire to that.
Oh yeah, no, she's a freak of nature, don't mind her. I think Brian Dooher put it best when he said that, you know, you can go and have a reunion in 2018 about 2008 and feel like you've just walked back into the dressing room the day after or the week after you win an All-Ireland. So I just want to thank our guests on stage tonight for kind of, you know, just chatting about memories and the importance of sport, the importance of their bond with the veterinary school here in UCD. And I hope if you take anything away from tonight, you take away rekindling a friendship, or you know, opening yourselves back up to meeting up with people you haven't seen in years and talking about your involvement in the veterinary practice, but also in sport as well. Because like Brian Mullen said, it is so important for us all to have that connection, you know, for our own well-being and our mental health as well. So thank you to everybody on stage. Thank you to everybody in the audience. We will have. There is a bar outside, and I believe Michael is going to sing and dance, but first he's going to close off the evening. So thanks very much, Michael.
Gurmila Magad, Evanne, you've just been a wonderful host. I think she deserves a special round of applause. Thank you very much. It's just been a great evening. I have enjoyed it so much. You know, fantastic. Gurmila Magad. I would like to sincerely thank all of those who've made this a very special evening. Our sponsors, Bimeda, Zoetis, and MSD Animal Health. Dominic O'Keefe and Jason Masterson of UCD Student Centre. Our event working group, Helen Graham, Aidan Kelly, and Owen Ryan, who deserve a wee round of applause. Thank you very much. Evanne, Chuilinn, Cinnse, our panel and special guests, and everyone who contributed names and information to the project, including colleagues in the school and alumni. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the evening. Gurmaiga.